The Nigerian Senate says it is planning to amend the 2022 Electoral Act to make electronic transmission of results mandatory. The move, it says, is to allow uploading of polling unit-level results and incorporate result sheets used at different levels of result collation. The amendment, according to the Senate, will allow for diaspora voting, at least for the presidential elections. The Senate emphasized the need to unbundle the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to enhance its efficiency and effectiveness in planning and conducting subsequent elections. For a conversation on this and on whether or not Nigeria needs a new constitution, we're now being joined by a human rights lawyer and former national president of the Committee for Defense of Human Rights, Malachy Ugwumadu. Good to have you on Arise News. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be back. Thank you.
So let's start with the Senate's proposal to mandate electronic transmission of election results, from 2027 at least. What happens in the event that INEC experiences another technical glitch?
I think that is the big elephant in the room. First is that idea had been conceived, but it didn't quite crystallize in the sense that every effort got thwarted at the last bus stop, so to speak. With respect to other categories of election, they did. But with respect to the presidential election, they suffered that hiccup. And that became the concern of Nigerians. Indeed, we must appreciate that aspect of the reform was what lent credibility. In fact, it almost secured the integrity of that process. And on account of that, very many Nigerians, particularly the youths who are familiar with the integrity of such an exercise, developed confidence, became hopeful that perhaps this time around the vote was going to count. Because if you are given the opportunity to be able to establish the pattern of the vote, the outcome of the vote, in relation to what was experienced at the polling unit, then everyone could go home satisfied that what happened at the polling unit is what was declared. But the fact that it didn't turn out that way was the source of the resentment and, if you like, lack of confidence that many people had regarding that presidential election.
And with the Senate now making this claim that they are going to be reviewing the Electoral Act in order to allow for this electoral voting and for quite a few other things, do you have the confidence that they will be able to scale through some of these red tapes or hurdles that could potentially crop up in order to keep things as status quo? Because obviously some individuals benefit from the system not working as it should. Do you have faith?
Well, the first point is to establish that amendments of laws is well within the remit, within the purview of the legislature, no less the Senate. So if the Senate had come out to say they're going to do something about that particular provision of the law that left it ambivalent, whether it is mandatory or optional, that is within their rights. However, as Nigerians, we're no longer satisfied just at the point where promises and assurances are made. These are vows that need reaffirmation through concrete actions before we take them for their words. In fact, I don't think it is left for, imagination, considering the degree of damage. In fact, if you remember that is even part of why the petition is in court, it's in tribunal and then to the Supreme Court today, you would see that we cannot but deal with the outcome of those challenges that we face. But the question is, to what extent are we going to be thinking with our laws at every election cycle? It started with the Constitution. And some of us have argued that, look, it's not the Tea Party, it's not a runoff thing. I mean, where at every turn and curve, all we do is to continually begin to... There's a remarkable difference between legislations, that's laws, and constitution. The legislature, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives, can deal with amendment of laws. But the creation of constitution itself is not the business of the legislature. I believe that's a different argument. But talking about confidence, well, we can only hope against hopes. We keep hoping for the best. We are stakeholders. We desire that the best should come out of these processes. However, we must not lower the guards in terms of pointing out the fault lines and encouraging those whose responsibility it is to secure and give us a functional legislation to deal with the experiences we have. So if you talk about confidence, well, I would say leave that for now. Let us keep pressurizing the stakeholders, the state actors, to ensure that we get the best out of where we are at the moment. But I know that in a few days or weeks, we might have the judiciary intervene specifically on these issues because it has raised a lot of doubts, a lot of controversy, and heated up the polity in a way that we would have moved further than we are at the moment.
Now, there's also been calls for a new constitution, and I know that you briefly spoke about that. I'd like to know what your take is on that.
I've done I've documented my view on this point, and I was lucky to have that published. The point cannot be overemphasized that there is a difference between laws and constitution in the hierarchy of legislations. The Constitution is at the apex of laws anywhere in the world. Now, that being the case, it is also an established fact that whereas the legislature is saddled with the responsibility of making laws, amending laws, reviewing them, the Constitution can only be legitimate if it derives from a people-driven, a people-led process. If it is the outcome of the desire of the people. And how does that happen? It doesn't come by a fiat or through a decree or through a selection of some people in committee sessions to... No. It is the deliberation of each aspect of that constitutional arrangement by the people of that political entity that gives, my word, legitimacy as distinct from validity. So we have the 1999 Constitution. As lawyers, we go to court and advocate and quote sessions. What that says or presupposes is that it is valid. It's a valid constitution. But is it legitimate? The answer is no. It is not, because if you open the first page, I have my copy, but outside there. If you open the first page of the Constitution, you will see expressly written that this is Decree 24 of 1999. Once you say decree, we all know what it means. It's quite different from law, quite different from Constitution. And you cannot, therefore, in another breath, begin to read in the preamble of that Constitution that we have resolved to make unto ourselves the following constitutions. So where the crisis is that whereas we have the written laws, the ownership of it it cannot be captured in that document. That constitution did not come from the people of Nigeria. And this has been the problem. Now, on the last count, we have had 5 alterations, if you like, amendments. All of these amendments have not addressed the crucial problems of federalism. The Constitution has a name. It says the Constitution of the Federal Republic. It stops there. If you go to the expert provisions of those constitutions, and if time permits me, I will read them out, you would find that whereas it answers a federal constitution. It is indeed a unitary constitution. So the robe does not make the monk. It does not lie on the name or in the name that is used to capture the constitution. It is much more important, the content of it. If you have that kind of contradiction for a heterogeneous society, divided along the lines of culture, language, you can only but know that it's only a question of time before the crisis will set in. And those crises are already manifested in what we are experiencing today. Poor devolution of power. Federalism as a political concept recognizes the juxtaposition of power at different tiers of government. Here, you will see heavily over concentration of that power at the center. This is why the IGP, all the way in Abuja, can tell you what will happen at Afibo. Can talk of what will happen in Borno, same thing in Ebonyi. If you go to the judiciary, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, as of today, has a hand in who becomes the chief judge in faraway Afipo, like I said. It cannot be so. Once you see such concentration of power, over concentration of power at the center, without effective devolution of the same state power along the tiers of government, then the crisis of federalism has set in. And what is more, up until recently, you used to have 68 items in the exclusive legislative list, to the detriment of the federating units that ought to actually exercise the real power, leaving to the federal government just a few important national assignments that foster the cohesion in a federating unit. Things like currency, defense, foreign policy, and just a few of those. Every other thing ought to be in the concurrent list, if you like, in the residual list. But that's not the case with Nigeria. So I make the point that we cannot continue, we cannot afford to continue with the amendments. It will never stop. In short, if you look closely at what is happening, it appears to me that that exercise is actually reserved to satisfy the political elite. Because from Mantu, I'm talking, and it's usually reserved for the deputy Senate presidents. Ibrahim Mantu, of blessed memory, superintended that exercise in the first place. Go and read the report. Not up to half of what was recommended passed through. In fact, almost everything died when the states were invited, because they ought to also participate before it becomes effectual. After him, you had the next Senate president, up until Senator Omo Agege. In short, in the case of Omo Agege, I'm sure that if I asked you, you probably wouldn't know what happened. So at the end of the day, it has become a ritual, heavily funded, with lots of taxpayers' money, but leading us to nowhere. We are the ones who go to court, and we see these contradictions inherently embedded in this constitution without the capacity of those who are parading themselves to resolve this contradiction. And we're all facing it. So what we need is a people's constitution, and is a brand new constitution. And we shouldn't kid ourselves about it. And anyone who tells you that who has the authority to do that, tell him or her that there's a difference between legislation, which is laws, and constitution.
Well, that was a lot that was said. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Malachy.